Hello, vinyl community, and hello, Christian, Siren05. Christian from Australia has done a tremendous job in introducing us to different genres and movements in special VC videos. So I was thinking of doing a response myself to that, exploring the progressive, prog and psychedelic Swedish music, especially from 1960. I think we're gonna start 67 and end at 75. Now, I'm gonna base this video or videos of my collection. I have them in different genres, and Swedish Prog is one of them. But I don't have everything, of course. It's really hard to collect everything. It's very expensive, and yeah, it's hard to find everything, obviously. But I think that I have a collection now that paints a pretty good picture of what Swedish Prog and Swedish Psych is. And I don't claim to have all the information either. I'm not an expert of any kind, so I may be the wrong person doing this video. So everything that I say, take it with a pinch of salt and go explore yourselves. Through collectors, go online, research, read, ask questions and stuff like that. And please comment down below if you have any questions, and I'll try to answer them as good as I can. So starting off, Swedish Prog, we have to understand that Swedish Prog and English and American prog is not at all the same. The term prog in Sweden doesn't mean the same thing as prog. Sure, it's progressive, but it's not in the same one sort of genre. It's a whole different mixed bag. I think that when the term was established and used here in Sweden, it was because of the lyrical content, not the music. Because progressive or prog lyrics in Swedish music back in the day was very left-wing and political, and I think that the term progressive comes from that. But Swedish Psych and prog is more influenced of rock, obviously, classical music, contemporary classical music, electronic, ambient, jazz, obviously, and a lot of folk, traditional folk music here in Sweden, as you will see. But mainly, I think that what influenced the most was the hippie era of the time period, the hippie era of 1960s, early 70s. This kind of movement where everything was possible and everyone could be an artist, could be a musician, doing their own thing. So I think that is what we Swedes defined as progressive back in the day. Explaining this very good is this book here, Progressive Music 1967 to 1969. It's written by Swedes, but it's entirely in English. And it explores all the most important, at least, records of the time, and has some history also. And I'm basing this video a lot on this, but there's also more books that you can read, but they are only in Swedish. And the term progressive, as you will see in this video or these videos, there's a lot of different genres I'm going to explore. But all the things I'm showing is in this book. Therefore, I categorize them and sort them in my collection as Swedish progressive music. And having that said, and you have to agree or not agree with me and the book, yeah, we'll see. But I want to start off with some context, really, and see what made progressive music what it is and what it was. So let's start from the beginning. Let's start in the 50s. In the 50s, as in most Western countries, music in general was a thing to have in the background or to dance to. And very little was aimed at a more cultured audience, and little was left to the imagination of the thinking man. We had songs about love, puppies, fast cars and food, and the more rebellious sides of music was a boom of Elvis impersonators, shaking their hips but still singing about love and fast cars. Now, the Great War was a thing of the past, and a new generation of young adults were growing up. And if I may generalize a little bit, and taking an example, we have Germany now with a generation of youngsters that was ashamed of their parents' politics, and they try to find their own path in expressing themselves through culture. And Sweden kept neutral throughout the war. And my own personal guess is that this generation also bared some scars from that. Could we have done more? Could our country have done more? Could our parents have done more? And a hunger grew for participating, demonstrating, and being a part of something greater, something bigger, and a change. And a change would come in the 60s with young musicians rattling the cage. But before we can run, we must first learn to crawl. So let's take this journey and start off in 1967 out of a vinyl perspective. So let's start off with not so much of a prog or psych record in 1967, and I'm gonna start off with this record. This is Togas Studio from 1967. Togas is a group from Gothenburg who made their debut on the Swedish music scene in 1963 or 64. A Beatles kind of band like most other bands back in the day. But with this, the fifth record and the peak of their career, they went to London to record this in, I think, Abbey Road Studios. And it's a studio record with all that magic, very well written songs and very well made record on Parlophone, where it's said to be the Sgt. Pepper of Swedish pop music. And sure, I agree. Where Beatles took their inspiration from India, Togas took their inspiration from the north of Sweden and traditional folk music. And you can really hear that with a lot of fiddles and stuff like that on the record. And this is where it gets interesting, because here is the mark that was left and that colored the entire Swedish prog and folk catalog, using this sort of folk music inspiration. And they even started lyric-wise to explore a little bit outside that kind of puppy love stuff. You have She's Having a Baby Now in 1967, and talking about teenage pregnancy had to be a little bit controversial back in the day. Togas, this was the last record they made, and the best, if not the best, pop record ever recorded in Sweden, in my opinion at least. A guy called Tommy Blom went his way, and the other guys morphed into something called Blonde. They released 1 or 2 records, and Göran Lagerberg, who plays bass, later went on to work with Kebnekaise and Egba, and more of that later on. But the first record in this prog and psych video, Togas Studio, highly recommended. So if Togas was pop psych, then the next one is more of a jazz psych record. And of course I have to show you Hansson and Nicholsons Monument from 1967, their debut, this power duo of a freaking band. Fantastic release and a fantastic duo. You have Jan-Olof Karlsson on drums from the more jazz tradition, played jazz and free jazz, and Bo Hansson, who knew nothing about playing a Hammond organ, just jumped in on it and played his heart out. He didn't read notes or anything like that. He just went on feeling. And that sort of mix was just the perfect mix for a psychedelic jam band almost. Whereas their songs on this, they were more famous for long jams on their live sets back in the day. 30, 40, 50 minutes long songs, just jamming. And think about it, it's just 2 instruments, but they make it so much alive. Really colored the Swedish psych and prog scene to come. Now we're continuing on to a more experimental part of the early Swedish psych and prog scene. And it's Persson's sound, and it all sums up to one person, Bo Anders Persson, who was the brain behind Persson's sound. And while this is fairly unknown maybe to many people, the groups he formed later on, International Harvester, and Trägräs och Stenar, is more known. This is before that, but with some of the same people. What this is Bo Anders Persson was a music student in Stockholm back in the day, and when he saw minimalistic composer Terry Riley performing, he wanted to copy that, but also put in some commercial bits and pieces from Rolling Stones, for example, and do something with that. And what he came up with was Persson Sound. This is from Subliminal Sounds in 2010, a box set, because Persson Sound never released anything. So 3 LP set of just unreleased material. This is before International Harvester and before Trägräs och Stenar. It even spans from demos in 1966, very, very early for experimental music in Sweden. Highly recommended, and we'll come back to Bo Anders in just a few minutes. So, moving on from Bo Anders Persson to another group, and I'm going to show you 2 records now. 1967 still, but we're moving on to 1968. 1967, Baby Grandmothers were popular live acts, one could say. Took inspiration from the English and American Psych scene, like Cream and stuff like that. More like a guitar-based rock and roll sound, but still with a progressive touch. Now, they didn't release any records either. They released 1 single in Finland, which is very sought after. But again, Subliminal Sounds have released this, a 2 LP set, I think it is, yes, with unreleased material and the single and stuff like that on it. Mekki Bodemark, the singer, he jumped on this project, and soon after this was disbanded in 1968, he did a group called Mekki Markmen, which continued on with the same psychedelic rock sound. I think that they released 3 records, 2 or 3 records. When Mekki, the singer and brain behind this project, left, the other guys formed Kebnekaise later on. Another band we'll continue on to explore later on. So what we have seen up till now is different psychedelic and progressive bands forming and recording but not releasing that much, and we have big general labels like Polydor and Parlophone that are releasing a little bit more experimental music. But we still lack the sort of label that carries these alternative artists. And Love Records in Finland, they, I guess, liked what Bo Anders Persson did and released International Harvester, his next band project, Good Rosemary, from 1968. This is psychedelic, it's drony, it's rocky, it's jammy, it's folky. It has everything that one wants from Swedish psychedelic and progressive music, and in my opinion, one of, if not the most interesting records ever recorded and released in Swedish music history. It's one of my very favorite records. I have both the reissue from the 80s and the original from 1968. And Bo Anders Persson is the guy to look up if you're interested in Swedish psychedelic. The years to come, 69, 70, 71, 72, Bo Anders Persson made Harvester and then Trägräs och Stenar. And if you know your psychedelic music in Scandinavia, you know about those bands and how important they were. So we have always had a nice jazz tradition in Sweden with really good musicians spanning from the 50s, moving on to the 60s and 70s. And a young guy formed a band in 1968 that he called Made in Sweden, a trio. The guy is called Georg Wadenius, a guitarist. in 1968 they recorded their first record in just 6 hours, and it won a Grammy Award here in Sweden. With their next one, that was even better, and that's called Snakes in a Hole from 1969. And as you can see, we're moving to the later part of the 60s now. Very psychedelic cover, and the music is just fantastic, jazz, rock, and a very psychedelic background there from the time period, Swedish Sin. Just 3 guys, and Jojje continued on in the same time period, doing children's records, 2 of them, and with Made in Sweden as a background group. But moving on to that sort of a little bit jazzier rock sound, I think moved the music forward, and that's why I'm showing it. So the last record for the 60s, before I move on to the 70s, where we're really gonna take off, is a guy called Progg with the record Ja det är det. Now a lot of people, or most of them back in the day here in the 60s, they sang in English because that's what you did. But this guy here, he went into the studio with metronome, and along with him he took Jojje Wadenius from Made in Sweden with him, and Janne Karlsson from Hansson & Karlsson on drums. Jojje played bass to record his stuff, and everything was in Swedish. So what you have is like rock music, but with Swedish lyrics. And this was the first time that anyone did that full out, a psychedelic rock record with Swedish lyrics. And what that did was it opened up for a lot of other musicians to embrace their own language, and they with this record knew that you could make a hit record without singing in English. This is a terrific record, and a good wrapping up of the 60s. So I guess that's the basics of Swedish psychedelic and progressive music, at least from my collection's point of view. And I think that you now see that it's a very broad kind of scene, even if we're only I'm only showing records from 1967 to 1969. But we're going to continue in the next film to show 1970 to 1975, and a lot of records just to broaden it even more. But now you have the basics, the foundation of this scene that influenced so many great bands to come. So join me in the next video.